Hey cellists, one of my viewers asked if I could do a quick video about the Sautillé bow stroke. It's a great topic. I'm not sure if I can do a quick video on that topic. I'm not sure if I'm capable of doing a quick video on any topic, but I'll do my best. First of all, I'm going to talk about what Sautillé bow stroke is. If you already know what it is, you might want to skip to this timestamp that I'm going to put on the screen, which will be about the basic mechanics of actually doing Sautillé bow stroke. If you already know how to do the Sautillé bow stroke, but just want some tips to do it better, or if you're struggling with some part of it, you might want to skip to this next timestamp I'm putting up, which will be some troubleshooting ideas and ways to overcome some problems you may be having with the bow stroke. So what is the Sautillé bow stroke? Well, sautiller is a French word that means something like jumping or springing. It's a bow stroke that we use pretty much exclusively for fast, separate bows, light kind of playing, kind of bouncy sounding bow stroke. It's something that we use for second movement of Elgar concerto is a good example, or fast show pieces like At the Fountain, or Dance of the Elves, pieces like that. That's what the Sautillé bow stroke is mostly for. And it's similar to spiccato bow stroke. The difference is with spiccato, we're going to be a little bit closer to the frog. And we're actually trying to control each bounce. And therefore, spiccato bow stroke is something we can use for pretty big variety of tempo. So, because I'm controlling each bounce, I can go pretty slow, or I can go faster. So that is fairly controlled. The other thing that's different about it is that with a spiccato bow stroke, the bow is actually bouncing off the string. The hair is leaving the string. With a sautillé, we're doing it farther out on the bow, and we're not controlling each bounce, and the hair doesn't really leave the string. The bounce comes from the springiness, the natural springiness of our bow. And I will give you a performer's view of how that works right now. I'm going to try to hold my phone while I do this bow stroke here so you can see the performer's view. Spiccato bow stroke, I'm moving in closer to the frog, and for spiccato you can see the hair is actually leaving the string to some degree. For sautillé, moving more towards the middle, hopefully you can see that the stick is bouncing like crazy, but the hair doesn't really leave the string. And you can kind of feel if you just drop the bow and let it bounce, you can see how the bow kind of springs for a little bit. And obviously I'm not making all of those little rebounds happen. And that's sort of the feeling you got to get your bow, got to lock into that, where you're making those rebounds turn into the springiness of the bow stroke you need. All right, so how do you do the Sautillé bow stroke? First of all, I have to say it's one of those bow strokes that you will really have to just get the feeling of it. It's kind of like learning to ride a bicycle. If you've never ridden a bicycle before and somebody just tells you everything they know about how to ride a bicycle, you won't be able to just instantly do it. You have to get on, get the feeling for it, maybe fall over a few times, and then eventually you'll get the feeling for it. Sautillé bow stroke is a kind of similar thing. You'll have to practice it and find what works for you, find what feels right for you. And it's going to probably be a little different for each person. I also have to say that one day you will probably get the feeling and the sautillé will happen, but the next day maybe it will go away. It's a little frustrating, but that's kind of the way the learning process often goes with these kind of things. So you just have to keep practicing every day. You'll probably have fewer times when it goes away. I've known a few professionals that had, for some reason, their sautillé stopped working temporarily, and so don't get impatient about it, and just keep working at it. So the first thing you have to be able to do the sautillé bow stroke is a fast repeated bow stroke that comes from the elbow. So this is one reason my beginning cello students don't get to graduate from Suzuki Book 1 until they can do all of these kind of bow strokes that come from the elbow. It's surprisingly difficult with beginners to keep them from just doing it from the shoulder. Now, of course, Book 1 students are not learning to do sautillé, but to be set up well to do sautillé, they have to be able to do a bow stroke that comes from the elbow. So if you've already got that going well for you, you're in good shape. The next thing I would recommend is practicing some just on the string, détaché around the middle with your metronome on, maybe 16th notes. And you can find a speed where this feels pretty relaxed, moving pretty nicely. Then, because this bow stroke has to go fast, I'd say 16th notes at about 120, that's my guess, beats per minute, is about as slow as you can do a sautille and make it really work well. So you may find when you get into that range that your nice loose elbow starts to tighten up. So I would just start putting the metronome on in just a few clicks at a time, going faster, trying to really concentrate on keeping this relaxed. And when you hit that point where you feel the muscles in your elbow starting to work against each other and tighten up, try to keep them relaxed and try to increase the speed you're able to get to before that tightens up. I think this is really important because you can probably just move your arm back and forth really fast like this, but if the muscles haven't learned to coordinate that fast, they're going to tighten up and you're going to get tired really fast and possibly even hurt yourself. All right, so once you get that happening, by the way, I think open strings are fine. I think to get this to work, maybe a finger note, it's probably going to be an easier way to get it started. So I'm going to take a D here just for the purposes of this video. So I'm around the middle of the bow. If I start going faster, now there's a point where the stick starts to jump. And when you get fast enough, what you'll need to do if your stick doesn't automatically start jumping. Now, it may just start jumping. You may get the feeling of it right away. That's great. If that happens, it very likely won't happen. But if it does, then just go with that. But otherwise, then you will need to start trying to experiment with the different levels of tightness in your hand, looseness in your hand. And I would say always try to keep looseness in your shoulder and in your elbow at all times. So you try just experimenting so till you can start to get it to bounce. Now, we have to talk about the wrist here. The wrist needs to be flexible and the fingers need to be flexible. So again, this is sort of a prerequisite. If you have trouble just doing basic bow strokes with good flexibility in the wrist and the fingers, then I think before you can get a good sautillé, you probably got to go back and work on some flexibility in your fingers and wrist. Otherwise, this is going to be very hard to get this. But let's assume that you've got that flexibility. And now you're going to hear some teachers say that the motion of the wrist is completely passive, so that all the motion is coming from the elbow, initiated by the elbow, which I pretty much agree with. But to say that the wrist is completely passive, we're going to talk about that. So if you just move your elbow back and forth and just let your hand hang like this, it's very easy to have the wrist feel really loose. And this is good. This is sort of what you need to feel to do this bow stroke. The problem is, if you do this without the bow in your hand, it's very easy to be loose. But once you put a little bit of weight between the thumb and these fingers, you notice, even with just a little weight, the wrist goes from very floppy to much more rigid. So the reason I'm saying all of this is that if you are trying to do any bow stroke and try to keep the same looseness in your wrist, like totally passive wrist motion, without the bow in your hand, as you get with the bow in your hand, you may not be able to do it. Here's my theory on it. You feel free to disagree with me about this, but I think that most of us have been playing for a long time and developed a lot of flexibility in our fingers and our wrist. Feel like this motion, this, is a passive motion that is just happening as a reaction to the elbow moving. But I think part of the thing is we are actually making that happen, but it doesn't feel like it anymore because we've gotten so good at it. That's my theory about this anyway. Part of the reason I say this is if I'm doing a sautillé bow stroke, I can actually stop moving from my elbow and keep moving from the wrist. At this point, it's hard to tell probably in the video, but the motion of my elbow is now kind of passive, and this is actually happening from me actively doing this. I'm saying all of this because you may experience it different ways. I just don't want you to try to do such a loose bow hold that you feel like you're going to drop your bow and wonder what you're doing wrong. So that's how I feel. Now, another example of this, if you've ever seen, we're lucky enough to see Rostropovich do Dance of the Elves, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of moments in that where that bow stroke is coming just from the fingers of the wrist. It's going so fast, and it often just looked like this part of the arm was not moving at all. I can't even begin to exactly imitate what Rostropovich did. I think it comes like this. So I'm throwing all of this out there because I think this should be in the mix that you use as you experiment to get what feels right to you. If the passive feeling of the wrist like this works for you, then definitely do that. But if you're feeling like that's not working, a little more active feeling of making the bow move from the fingers and especially right here from the wrist might work for you. Last thing I'll say, I know a lot of teachers talk about making circular motion with the bow, and I totally agree with that. I don't think about it personally myself when I'm playing. I'm throwing it out there because it may help you to think of maybe making, from your point of view as a performer, kind of a clockwise motion. Maybe the bottom of the frog would be tracing a very flat oval shape. I know that's happening when I play. I don't think about it so much that way. If that helps you to think about it, then definitely do that. If it doesn't help you, then try something else. So that is just a very quick rundown of the basics of the sautillé bow stroke. Once you can get it to work on one note or a couple of notes, then you're going to have to try it in different places, because what feels right in one place, once you get that, then as you're playing higher, it's going to be slightly different, especially if you're going down to low strings, different position. You'll have to make some small adjustments for it to work on every string. Eventually, you should be able to get it on all parts of the cello, and I think maybe some scale practice, something like that, all the way up and down. Just doing a very quick demonstration of that. So let's say you've been working on your sautillé bow stroke and you can do it reasonably well, and you're starting to work on a piece of music that uses the sautillé bow stroke. By the way, the first piece that I use to teach sautillé to my students is usually the Scherzo by Van Goens that comes up in the very end of book 8. So that's a good one to start on. Or if you're working on the second movement of Elgar Concerto, which I mentioned earlier, I know that when I learned it many, many years ago, I'm sure I did what a lot of students do, is you're starting out slowly, because that's the way you have to learn to get all the notes, and doing sort of a spiccato bow stroke, like this, and then getting faster and faster. I think it's kind of hard, though, to transition from that spiccato bow stroke to what we really ultimately need the Sautillé bow stroke. So I would recommend, if you're working on something like that, to start off from the very beginning doing an on the string around the middle bow stroke. And then as you get faster and faster, you may find, if you've already worked on Sautillé bow strokes separately, that the springiness of the bow will just happen. I think it's an easier way to work up to the kind of bow stroke you need for those kind of pieces than to try to transition from a spiccato bow stroke, but to already be in the right part of the bow, using the right part of your arm and that kind of thing. So if you're working on Sautillé and it's maybe not working as well as you would like it to, I'm going to just throw out a few ideas that might be helpful for you. First thing is, I mentioned this before on an earlier part of the video, but the shoulder and the elbow need to stay loose. And as you're practicing, especially if you're practicing for a while, you got to guard that the shoulder doesn't start to come up or just tighten up, or these muscles in your neck also can start to get tight, especially if you're really working hard on this. Speaking of the arm and the hand, strangely, you may find that a little more firm bow grip is what you need to make the Sautillé bow stroke work. I find for myself that if I just think of very loose arm and wrist, but slightly firmer fingers, that kind of helps me make this work. Now let's talk about where the hair hits the string. That's kind of important. If you're having trouble making this bounce happen, you should look at the hair. You might find that the hair is not hitting the same part of the string on every bow stroke. You might see something like this. And that is going to be caused possibly by the angle of your bow is off. So I would check to make sure that you're really perpendicular to the string. You can look at a whole video I made about bow angle if you want some ideas about getting the proper bow angle. It could just be a matter of flexibility of the fingers, not adjusting the way they need to. So just watch out that you're not hitting the wrong part of the string. You may find that you're too far from the bridge. One of the things for the Sautillé to get the bounciness, this applies somewhat to spiccato as well. You got to think about if you're bouncing a basketball on a wooden floor, it's going to bounce nicely. If you try to bounce it on a shag carpet rug, it's not going to work as well because it's too soft. So it's a similar idea with the string. When you're closer to the fingerboard, that's an area of the string that's a little softer, a little more bouncy, and that can counteract some of the bounce you need from the bow. So you got to find too far here, maybe a little closer to the bridge. You got to experiment with that. Something just an idea to throw out there. Then one thing that you may overlook, the bow may just be too tight. And I have found that very often with students, that if I pick up their bow, I notice that they've tightened the bow where there's not a lot of curve left in the stick. And if you're a student and you give your bow to a professional just to try it out, you may notice that often the first thing they'll do is loosen the bow a little bit. Part of the reason is when you're really advanced player, you learn how to get sound not by pressing the bow down, but by getting in the right part of the string. But so just check. Sautillé won't work if the bow's too tight. So just check. You might try loosening your bow a little bit. Might help a little bit. And then one more thing regarding bows. There's no way around it. If you have a really cheap bow, it's probably not going to bounce that great. That's why people pay thousands and thousands of dollars to get a bow. And if you're watching somebody trying out bows, you know, a really advanced player or professional, if they're trying out whatever their concerto or whatever they're trying out, or Bach suite, there's going to be a moment when they're going to do this or something like that, because no matter how good the bow is, you really want it to be able to do that kind of bouncing bow stroke. So I hate to say it, but if you're just not making it work, you might want to look at your bow. Now, I happen to have, the bow I've been demonstrating on is worth many thousands of dollars, and I really like it. It can do most of what I need to. This is a dot bow. It's some kind of carbon fiber bow. I think I paid $40 for it new. This is something I use when I'm teaching so that if I'm worried about it getting knocked over by a student or whatever, I don't have to worry about it. And it still plays okay. And I can make the Sautillé bow, but if I pick up my nice bow, I can still do it on the other bow, but that's just something to throw out there. While I'm talking about bows and everything, I almost forgot to mention one thing. My teacher, Alan Harris, was very big on trying to do your bow strokes with the first finger not on the bow. All of the bow strokes. This had partly to do with making sure the elbow was in the right place, but I think sometimes we overlook getting a little bit of power in through this middle finger we're trying to get it all through the first finger, which mostly is what should be happening. But this is maybe something to consider if you're trying to get your sautillé to work better, is focus in on this finger. I can kind of do it with just that finger, but if I have both of these fingers where I'm really focusing on it, it definitely helps to make that work a little bit better. So this is kind of really a quick tour of different ideas about sautillé. There are lots and lots more ideas. Look at some other videos. If you have a teacher, talk to them about it. But I hope that this video gave you at least one thing that helps you improve your sautillé bow stroke.